Remember Jesus' claim in verse 12, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. Two outrageous claims. If we follow him, we will have the light of life, and if we don't, we condemn ourselves to live in darkness. As C.S. Lewis says in his Mere Christianity, making claims like that means that Jesus is either mad or bad or God. To decide which, we must examine the evidence, and that is what it appears the Pharisees do in verse 13. The Pharisees challenge him. Here you are appearing as your own witness. Your testimony is not valid. Actually, their approach is not to look at the evidence. Their approach is to dismiss him on the grounds that the only evidence Jesus is presenting is his own testimony about himself. In other words, it's just words, the words of only one man, so we can dismiss them. Jesus responds by saying that their challenge is wrong-headed for two reasons. Firstly, as he is the light, then his testimony is true because he is the light. Verse 14, Jesus answered, even if I testify on my own behalf, my testimony is valid. Why? Well, because, verse 14, I know where I came from and where I am going. But you have no idea where I come from or where I am going. In other words, he knows he has come from God and he is going back to God. He does not come from darkness and he is not going into darkness. The reason we won't believe someone when they testify about themselves is precisely because we all know that they may be lying. That is what living in darkness is like. You can't necessarily trust people, and so we look for corroboration. But the light does not need a witness, any more than the sun in the sky needs a witness. We know the sun is the sun, because by the light of the sun we see everything else. Light is its own witness. It reveals the world as it really is. And Jesus is the light. Has said we live in darkness, and the fact that we need witnesses proves the point. The light has revealed the truth about us. So where they judge by human standards, verse 15, and so look for witnesses, he does not need to judge anyone because his light simply reveals the truth by itself. Their response to Jesus in rejecting his claims reveals that they are indeed in darkness and have no idea where Jesus is from or where he is going. Now, this all seems a bit circular, doesn't it? Jesus says he is the light, and that proves he is the light, since the light is always true. I guess I could make a similar claim to be God myself, and you wouldn't believe me any more than the Pharisees believed Jesus. So, Jesus says, we can still apply the kind of judgments we are used to using in our dark world in order to see that he is the light. He offers us corroborating evidence, two testimonies, his own and also the testimony of his Father. The Pharisees don't get it at all. They think he's talking about his human father and are probably making a dig at his conception out of wedlock. But of course, Jesus doesn't mean his human father. He means God the Father. Now, it is just worth us pausing, I think, for a moment to consider how God the Father provides that second witness. And we have help because Jesus has already been around this argument before in John chapter 5. It's the miracles and the scriptures that show the Father's witness. Take the miracles. Even as one of the Pharisees said in chapter 3, verse 2, He came to Jesus at night and said, "Rabbi, we know that you are a teacher who comes from God, for no one could perform the signs you are doing if God were not with him." This goes back to Lewis's mad, bad, or God argument. If he really did do miracles, and they are attested to even outside of the New Testament, and the evidence for his resurrection stands serious scrutiny even today, then it must mean God is with him. And God would not be with a liar, so he can only be what he claims to be. And now let's take the scriptures. We've seen how clearly the Old Testament anticipated that a Messiah would come as the light for the world. It anticipated the miracles. It anticipated much of his teaching. It anticipated many of the details of his life. And most importantly, his death and resurrection. There have been many thousands of years of history. And so you might say someone was bound to have enough crazy coincidences that it looked like they were a miracle worker and really someone. However, with several hundred years worth of one nation's religion pinpointing many of the details of that person's life in advance and providing the context to make sense of that life, well, that is beyond coincidence. That is the action of God. Jesus didn't arrive into a vacuum only for a religion to be created around him. Israel's religion, that had been going for thousands of years, made perfect sense of him and all that he did. It gave it all meaning. So to miraculously provide bread in the wilderness in chapter 6 was just how God had acted before in the Exodus. To heal the lame and in chapter 5 and the blind to come in chapter 9 was just how God had said he would bring in his kingdom. During a crucial religious feast, the Feast of Tabernacles, with 1500 years of history behind it, dedicated to remembering God's provision of water and guiding light in the wilderness, he calls a people to come to him and drink, chapter 7, and he claims to be the light, chapter 8. Well, that's as clear as the sky is blue, isn't it? And ultimately to die on a cross as a Passover lamb and be raised from the dead was the ultimate fulfillment of what the Exodus was all about. These were not just coincidences. They are, in fact, the crescendo in God's unfolding history of the world. So let's take stock of the evidence. A light that witnesses to itself because his teaching makes perfect sense of the world around us. Miracles that can only be done through the power of God. And almost 2,000 years of God speaking and acting miraculously that point forward to and are perfectly fulfilled by Jesus' teaching, life, death, and resurrection. The evidence is fairly compelling, isn't it? And it certainly should have been for Israel's religious leaders who had all that Old Testament understanding and who saw the miracles with their own eyes. So why won't the Pharisees accept him? Well, we'll answer that question after our next song.